Hi, folks. I'm Nathaniel Stinnett with the Environmental Voter Project, and we have a great mini briefing for you today on environmental voters in New Mexico and the difference they can make in 2024 and the difference you can make as a volunteer or a donor mobilizing these environmental voters in New Mexico in 2024. So let's go ahead and get started. Very briefly, as a review, at the Environmental Voter Project, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that is laser focused on identifying people who care deeply about climate and the environment, yet aren't voting, and then we turn them into consistent voters. We do a four-step process. First, we work with data scientists to build what's called predictive models on voter files. And these models help us individually identify people who don't just care about climate and the environment, but care about it so deeply that they literally prioritize it as their number one issue over all other issues. So we identify those climate first voters, and then we get rid of the ones who are already good voters and instead focus on the ones who aren't good voters, the ones who need a behavioral intervention. And that's how we get to step number two, mobilization. We work with thousands of volunteers around the country to canvass and call and send postcards to these non-voting environmentalists. We as a staff also send digital ads and direct mail to them. And we run hundreds of randomized control trials each year. These are experiments that help us figure out which messages work best to which subgroups of these non-voting environmentalists to do just one thing, and that is get them to vote. That is what we are laser focused on, finding the environmentalists who don't vote and then turning them into better voters. Then we move to step three, habit reinforcement. We care deeply about growing the political power of the climate movement over time. So we do not keep our powder dry and only parachute into elections once every 2 years when it's a big federal race. No, when we go into a state, we use every election, no matter how small, as an opportunity to communicate with these low propensity environmental voters and change their habits and turn them into better, more consistent voters. Because ultimately, our goal is what you see in step four, and that is to change the electorate. We know that in order to get true climate leadership and true environmental leadership from politicians, we can't just rely on the goodness of their hearts or the soundness and rationality of our policies. No, what politicians respond to is political power. Politicians go where the voters are because politicians are in the business of winning elections. So, what we try to do with the Environmental Voter Project is create so many climate first voters, not non voters, but voters, that politicians have no choice but to follow and lead on our issues, or else they won't be politicians much longer. All right. In 2024, we are targeting 4.8 million of these low propensity environmental voters across 19 states. They are all registered to vote. They are all highly likely to list climate and the environment as their number one issue priority, and they are all unlikely to vote in the fall presidential election. Today, we're going to be focusing in on New Mexico in this short mini briefing. In New Mexico, we've identified almost 88,000 of these already registered super environmentalists who are unlikely to vote. Now, what does that number mean in the context of a state like New Mexico? Well, look, barely 900,000 New Mexicans cast a ballot back in the 2020 presidential election. And so this group of low propensity environmental voters is so big, it almost equals 10% of all ballots that were cast last time there was a presidential election. And the margin back in 2020 in New Mexico was less than 100,000. And so this population is almost as large as that. This is a really, really big pool of potential political power for the climate movement in New Mexico. When we look at this population, this 87,845, you can see the demographic makeup at the bottom of this slide here. But before I get into the numbers, let me provide some context. If you look at the very, very bottom row here, reg voters, that means registered voters. Here are the demographic breakdowns of all registered voters in New Mexico. So you'll see 8.6% of registered voters in New Mexico are age 18 to 24. 16.2% are age 25 to 34. So that's what the baseline of registered voters is. Now look at this next line above that, the LPEVs. That stands for low propensity environmental voters, which are this group that we at the Environmental Voter Project are going to be mobilizing in 2024. The first thing you'll notice is they're disproportionately young. That probably doesn't come as any surprise. Young people care deeply about climate and the environment. They also aren't as consistent voters as the rest of the population. You put those two factors together, and surprise, surprise, low propensity environmental voters in New Mexico are disproportionately young. One thing I'd like to point out, though, is look at this. Almost 14% of our targets are in their late 30s or 40s. Over 12% are age 65 and up. Those numbers are actually higher than we see in many other states. So oddly enough, these low propensity environmental voters in New Mexico aren't as young as the population of low propensity environmental voters we often see in other states. Second demographic trend I'd like to point out about this particular population, they are disproportionately people of color. So if you look at all registered voters in New Mexico, about 53% of them are white. If you look at our target population, these voters we're trying to mobilize to show up, fewer than 38% of them are white. And where that comes from is you'll see our target population is disproportionately Hispanic, disproportionately AAPI, and really disproportionately Native American. These low propensity environmental voters, Native Americans are twice as prevalent in that population as they are in the overall group of registered voters in New Mexico. Final thing I'll just like to highlight about New Mexico this year is if you look at the 2nd congressional district, the Environmental Voter Project has identified over 28,000 of these low propensity environmental voters there. Now, the 2nd congressional district extends from maybe the southwestern suburbs of Albuquerque all the way down to Las Cruces and then all across the southern part of the state. Southwestern suburbs of Albuquerque and Las Cruces are where a lot of the Democratic votes are. So Republican votes are clustered in the southern suburbs of Albuquerque and then certainly in the southeastern part of the state. The 2nd congressional district of New Mexico is one of a handful of true toss-up congressional districts in 2024. It doesn't lean Democrat. It doesn't lean Republican. It is a true, honest-to-goodness toss-up district. And a lot of people are going to be paying attention to it. The fact that we have identified over 28,000 of these low propensity environmental voters just in that district alone is an enormous opportunity. Because let me tell you what happened just a year and a half ago in 2022. Gabe Vasquez, the Democrat, won this district by only 1,350 votes. That's how close it was. And it's probably going to be about that close in 2024 as well. So we're going to be looking really closely at New Mexico too, and we feel like the Environmental Voter Project has a huge opportunity to make a difference there. How can you get involved? Well, first, you can volunteer. We have phone banking opportunities every day into our 19 states. We don't always have opportunities into New Mexico, but you better believe that in April and May, we're going to be mobilizing voters for the June primaries in New Mexico. And then once September starts, we're going to be mobilizing voters in New Mexico all the way through November 5th. We will also have postcarding campaigns. We've already had our first one. We're going to have 3 to 5, maybe 6 more in the rest of 2024. If you're not sure whether these volunteer opportunities are right for you, show up to one of them. Sign up on our website. They all start with a training. And after you take the training, if it's something you don't feel like doing, then don't do it. There's no pressure. But you owe it to yourself to give it a shot. You're watching this video because you care deeply about voter turnout, you care deeply about the climate crisis, and you recognize that 2024 is a crucially important moment in time for both of those things. So give it a shot. The second way you can make an impact is donate to support our work. You can go to environmentalvoter.org/donate, and the links are also going to be in the notes for this video. And you can make a one-time donation, or you can sign up for recurring monthly donations. Spread out your donations over time. It might be a little bit easier on your wallet, and it's really good for us because remember, we work year round. And so it's really, really good for us to be able to plan on this stuff. Third thing, do you want to host an event for your friends? Do you want us to brief you and them on our work at the Environmental Voter Project and how we hope to have an impact in New Mexico and elsewhere this year? Well, you'll see it's really, really easy. It takes place over Zoom. And just email us at info@environmentalvoter.org, and we'll reach right out to you and see if we can make it happen. Finally, subscribe to this YouTube page so that you can get a notification whenever we have mini briefings like this. And while you're at it, how about you share this mini briefing with your friends? All right, that's it. I can't wait to see all of you online at a phone bank or signing up for a postcarding event or see your donations come in. Thank you so much for being interested in our work at the Environmental Voter Project, and in particular, our work mobilizing environmental voters in New Mexico. Take care.